Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of my podcast. Welcome to the Rabbit Warren. It's nice to have you here. For anyone who isn't aware, although I assume that this group of people will be negligible, for those of you who aren't aware of who I am, my name is Mallow. I am a VTuber, currently on an extended hiatus, with an indefinite period. Oh wow, this is going off to a great start. I can't say a singular sentence correctly. That's hilarious. And yes, this is the first episode of a podcast that I am currently starting, like a white man in the year 2020. But hear me out. This is sort of a personal chronicle for myself. To talk about what's been on my mind recently. And I'd like to use it as an outlet for a lot of the stresses that I'm experiencing, especially in the fact that, for those of you who aren't aware, I am a medical student. And not to be like, oh my god, you guys have no idea how hard it is. It's genuinely quite difficult. It's a troubling undertaking, I suppose. It's quite harrowing sometimes, and I'd like to talk about not always what's happening in relation to my studies, but just clearing some headspace so that I'm able to, for lack of a better word, be able to sort of make more space for the things that I actually have to memorize. And today, I'd like to start off by, as you can probably tell by the title, I want to talk about rocks. Again, I said not all of these topics are going to be related to my studies. I have been interested in collecting rocks for a really long time. I'm like a weird little crow. I really like having shiny, pretty things. I was never quite into the whole, like, crystal healing, alternative, sort of methods of, I suppose, taking care of your health. Alternative medicine is what it's called, but I feel like that's too generous of a term for some things that are under that umbrella. I don't believe, just quickly disclosing, I don't believe that rocks that have been mined by human hand and polished into pretty little round things can fix you or heal you in any way, but a lot of those kinds of stores do sell polished stones for quite cheap, so they are a favorite of mine to go into, especially going into marketplaces and having little stalls. Often when I show a lot of interest in them and I'm able to identify certain stones, the storekeeper will become very excited and start talking to me about crystal healing, and I think it's very sweet that there's something that they are that impassioned about, something that matters so much to them, clearly. And although I cannot relate to it, I don't mind having to listen through it, I suppose. I don't really have the mental headspace to be super judgy about that. That's all, how different people cope with different things. I just don't think that alternative medicine should take the place of medicine that is backed by science, if that makes any sense. I see no harm in using it concurrently. Whatever helps you. There's the placebo effect, obviously. And there is an argument to be made that some of these alternative medicines could potentially prove to find a pathway to something that we haven't considered before in regular medicine. But I digress. I love stones. My favorite is Tiger's Eye Jasper. At the moment, it changes very frequently. Rainbow Onyx is also lovely. I have a set of Elder Futhark runes made out of polished rainbow onyx, and it is one of the prettiest things that I own. Oh shit, I'm sorry. I've said onyx. I meant obsidian. It's been a long day. Rainbow obsidian. I wanted to talk about that because I have a huge collection of stones in my room. There's like a small glass, fuck, I almost just lied, wooden pallet that I have that is filled with polished stones. I've identified most of them. A lot of them I got as gifts from friends who used to be into collecting stones and aren't super into it anymore, or had a bunch of duplicates that they didn't particularly want, so I'm quite happy about it. I do really enjoy having these things. Part of the fun for me is looking up the characteristics of them and trying to identify which stones they are. What you find is that there's a lot of names for very similar stones that have very minute differences. And often the names are quite literal. One of my favorites being Bloodstone, which is named for the fact that it is this deep green color, which, you'd be like, oh, well, Mello, you said it's Bloodstone and it's literal. It's probably red, right? No. The reason it's called Bloodstone is because there is a very deep red impurity within the green stone that shows up as like these thin lines that almost look liquid. And I think that whoever came up with the name and called it Bloodstone deserves a round of applause, because it's way cooler than just having a red stone and naming it Bloodstone. Snowflake obsidian is quite pretty. You can see the little white impurities that rise to the surface in little fractal patterns in crystalline chunks, like a snowflake. You would find a similar sort of fractal pattern. I think that's quite beautiful. And the sort of regular way that crystals form themselves is so fascinating to me. If you've ever seen how quartz grows within a geode, or just in general the way that you find the towers, they'll be marketed as towers, and they're these small columns that come to a point, a spike. And obviously, some places will polish stones like that into that shape on purpose. However, the shape of that is based off of how they occur in nature. You get these hexagonal shapes, you get these pentagonal shapes, you get these very geometric, very even sort of growth of crystals. And you'll find that crystals can break off and replicate. Crystals can seed, basically, where they spread out across an area, which is how you get geodes. Or by that I mean it appears that way. That's not what's chemically occurring, but if you've ever had the fun game that you ever played, one of those like at-home kids science experiments, where you fill a cup with salt water that's incredibly incredibly saturated, and you dip some thread into it, and crystals will begin to grow in this fashion, just from it almost looking like it's blooming from the thread. That's sort of what's happening, right, within the inside of geodes. You could almost believe that they're a living thing. On the topic of it being a living thing, though, what interests me the most is that it reminds me a lot of, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Narnia series, the Chronicles of Narnia. You should be. It's a wonderful high fantasy series. I personally love it because a lot of the world building isn't explained at all. And that often sounds like a negative thing, but I mean it in the most positive way. In the way that J.R.R. Tolkien put in so much effort into the world building that he created a justification for literally everything, and created an entire language just for the world that he wrote his story within. C.S. Lewis was... Alright, if... I heard this described this way once, and I've never forgotten about it. J.R.R. Tolkien is a man who has been working on a singular oil painting for decades, refining it, cleaning up every inch of it, making sure that every part is as technically perfect as it can be. And C.S. Lewis is a man who is flinging paint at a wall and going, "Look at my art!" Which is no wonder why Tolkien couldn't really stand him, despite them being in the same writing group. In one of the books, I believe the 5th or 6th volume in the Chronicles of Narnia, which, by the way, are not... they were not released in that order. It's just been ordered chronologically. So... yeah, they were not released in that order. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was the first published book in the Narnia series. However, you then have... oh, crap. Oh, I've lost the title of it in my head. It's gone. Anyway, sorry. That was a weird tangent for me to go on. In the book The Silver Chair, in the Chronicles of Narnia, it's insinuated that there is a world very, very, very deep below the surface of Narnia, as we know it, called Bism, B-I-S-M. And the world of Bism is incredibly interesting to me, because with the introduction of Bism, it is described as a place where jewels and gold and precious metals, outside of gold, I don't know why I said it like it was a separate thing, it's the same classification, where those things are all living creatures. They are alive, and the versions that we make, the stuff that we mine out of the ground and we turn into jewelry is the dead mummified remains of those living creatures from Bism. And outside of the incredibly dark ramifications of that, we are wearing corpses on our bodies in order to decorate ourselves. It speaks of these living versions of these preserved beauties that we love so deeply, are just shells of the real thing. And so while they look like the living organism that they were, sorry, my tongue twisting, although they look like the organisms that they were, they are in no way to the same amount of beauty, or are somehow lacking some aspect of them that makes them whole, and that makes them real. And before I move on to my next topic, I'd like to put up a little content warning. I will be talking about death, dead bodies, due to my studies, including the need to look at anatomy and human anatomy. There are cadaver studies, so I have to, part of my studies are essentially looking at manipulating and recognizing structures within cadavers, so human remains that have been preserved. In my case, they have all been donated to the university I attend for this specific purpose, to be used in study. But if any of that is upsetting to you, I would suggest, I would suggest not listening on, or I don't think I'll be discussing it in a way that's incredibly triggering, but of course I can't claim to know every person's individual boundaries. So if that is something that upsets you, please do proceed with caution if you do proceed, or click off if you'd like to. I appreciate you being here. And for those of you remaining, on the topic of that idea that these dead versions of the creatures within Bism being somehow lacking an aspect of them that makes them beautiful, reminded me recently as I was reading through it, and again this morning I was reminded of that when I went in for cadaver studies. And frequently when you study cadavers, their faces are not on display because it can be quite confronting. They're often covered with a towel to protect their sort of, I suppose, their modesty in a way, and also to protect students who may not be prepared to see that sort of thing. But as today we were going through the anatomy of the sort of the throat area, the lower jaw, and how that connects all to the respiratory system, many of the cadavers had visible faces, and these specimens are often, specimens is not the correct word, I apologize. The cadavers are often cut into ways to display certain structures that they are meant to be good indicators of. And so it's never going to be a head that has like the head of hair still attached It's often a head that's been cut open. A lot of heads that have been bisected, so along the front of the face, essentially, it's been bisected. However, this cadaver was a torso, neck, and head, where the neck skin had been stripped away, so you could see the structures within leading up to the lower jaw. This specific cadaver had experienced a pneumothorax, or as far as I can tell, that's my guess. A pneumothorax is essentially when air that shouldn't be within the pleural space is in the pleural space, and it causes the collapse of a lung. That is the most simple way I can say it, and I'm also very, very tired, so it may not be entirely accurate. I apologize for anyone who is listening who knows better than that, and who can explain it far better than I can. What I noticed immediately was that outside of the face, because I have a habit of, in order to protect myself, I often don't look at the face. I will look away from it, from the cadaver's face, because it's quite confronting. And as fine as I am personally, because of, again, everyone's boundaries are different, I do not feel uneasy around cadavers. It's still difficult to look at that, because we're hardwired to feel that way. But what I recognized today as I kind of looked at this cadaver's face and like actually genuinely looked at a full face, a full preserved face like that for the first time, I remember thinking to myself, oh, yeah, this is someone, well, this used to be someone, and they're not anymore. I've heard people describe the feeling of seeing a dead body of someone that you knew, especially, describe it as feeling like it is a shell. As if whatever made up that person has left. And what you're left with is this skeleton, not literally, well, the skeleton is left behind, but this sort of, I don't want to say husk, but this vessel that a person used to be in. And I didn't think it made them less beautiful. And I know it sounds like hippie shit to be like, oh my god, human life is so precious and beautiful, and people are so beautiful, oh my god. But it's genuinely, I remember, I thought for a second, oh, she looks like she could be sleeping. But then I thought about it, and as I looked at her, and not so much keeping her face in the periphery, because obviously I can't look away from her entirely because I'm studying the organs and the structures within. I keep faces in the periphery because I'm afraid of looking at them. Or I was until today. I realized that it's not as... I was afraid of it. The confronting part wasn't the actual act of looking at her. Sorry, it wasn't like her face, it was the act of looking at her that was so confronting. It felt almost disrespectful. But I know that that's just like a weird thought that I had. But I remember I thought first that she looked like she could be sleeping, and after a little while, as I looked at her more, because I was looking at her neck and the structures in her neck, I thought to myself, no, there's something fundamentally different, isn't there? Yeah, her eyes are closed, and I guess maybe part of it is the fact that, you know, she's been essentially cut up. As gross and visceral as that sounds, but, you know, it's for educational purposes, and they consented to having their body utilized in this way. Maybe it was that, maybe it was the surroundings, but I couldn't... There was just something fundamentally gone, you know? It was quite interesting. Oh god, that sounds so like detached from reality to say it that way. But it made me think a lot. I personally am not afraid of death, and I don't mean that in the death can come for me anytime, or like, I want to die sort of way. I mean that in like It's not scary because I know that it is inevitable. It will happen. Of course, like anybody else, it would be nice if it happened later. But the truth of the matter is that death will come for me at some point. Death will come. It just sounds so silly that way, but I hope you understand my meaning. I don't know. It stuck with me a lot, that thought. That I don't think, and not to dump so much of my personal beliefs into one podcast episode, but I don't believe in an afterlife. And I don't believe in reincarnation. I think I would like to, but I don't. Of course, this isn't in an attempt to, I suppose, put down those who do. My personal beliefs should have no bearing on whether or not yours are valid, or the reasoning that you have behind them. That is completely personal, and that's not something I can dictate on whether or not that's silly, or whether or not I think it's true. But that's just what I think, based on my own experiences in life, and it hit me more so than it ever has, because I looked at her, and the cadaver had still had coming out of her thorax, she had a fluid drain put in. I'm not sure if it was a fluid drain, but there was a drain put in. So that was still a remainder from when she was in hospital and when she was receiving care before she passed away. And it hit me harder than it ever had that it's final, yes, but it didn't, how do I say this? It was no longer confronting. I wasn't frightened of the act of looking at her face anymore. I kept looking back at her and thinking, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you for allowing your body to be used for this after you're gone, because when she was here, and when her body wasn't just an empty vessel, she wanted her body to be used to help people. And I think that's incredibly noble. On that note, a lot of people have questions about cadaver study. And a lot of the questions I get are, do people pass out? Do people throw up? Yes. Big yes. About one person in each essential group that was brought in, threw up or passed out. And I remember saying to someone right before I went into my first ever cadaver study, I was bright and fresh into medical school and I didn't know how much it would destroy me mentally. I remember saying, God, I hope I don't throw up. Not because it would be embarrassing, but because if I had donated my body to medical study like this for medical students to look at and learn from, if I had done that, and some 18-year-old fresh out of high school took one look at my body and just threw up, I would feel kind of insulted. Like, I know I would be dead and I wouldn't be able to care, but, it felt very disrespectful in a way. And I don't know, I was determined not to let that happen. I always think with cadaver study, the main huge thing, and they hammer it into you, that, you have to respect the bodies, and it's true. Although I talk on and on about them being husks and not being a person anymore, they still used to be a person. And there's a level of decorum that you have to maintain, and a level of respect you have to have, because this sort of structure, this macro structure that you're looking at that's built out of so many intricate tiny things to make it all move, to make it all work. It's not just a box. As much as I keep saying that it seems like that, it's not just a box. it's still representative of a person. It's still symbolic of a person who had a family, a person who had loved ones, a person who, when they passed, certainly people felt grief. You, in that position that you're given, and I am so genuinely lucky and so genuinely privileged to be in a place where I am allowed to study this way and to have access to this resource, this like wealth of knowledge that I can only gain because of the generosity of people who decided that that was worth it. People whose family don't get to keep their body. As grim as that sounds, they didn't get to have them buried, they didn't get to have them cremated, they didn't get to scatter their ashes somewhere that they loved. Their body is here in my university, sitting in a laboratory for us to take a look at and for us to learn from. The family doesn't get to have that remain. They don't get to have those remains, like if they chose not to donate their body. That is a massive sacrifice. And I am so thankful that this is something that I get to do. And this is something that I have been deemed worthy of, essentially. And if I do not act in a way that is in accordance with that, then fuck, maybe I don't deserve it, you know? And by maybe I mean you definitely don't deserve it. Anyway, I feel like I've been prattling on for long enough. I hope that you guys enjoyed. My audio quality is not as pleasant as you probably expect from a podcast. I'm still out here with my Blue Snowball Ice, also known as baby's first gamer mic. This is like the microphone that you make Minecraft videos with. My room is entirely non-sound treated. Some sound like shit. I'm sorry. If I ever get an update to my setup, I will probably scream about it, so you'll probably all already know. But that might be cool. That might be a thing to do in the future. Anyway, thank you for dropping in. Thank you for listening to me ramble on for about, what? Well, now, exactly 28 minutes. Thank you so much for dropping in. Thank you for giving me the time of day that you have. I am so thankful. And hopefully the editing on this won't be shit. But yeah. Whenever you're listening to this, have a good evening, have a good afternoon, have a good morning, have a good rest of your day. This is Mallow. This has been the Rabbit One podcast. And hopefully my next few episodes won't be so dark. I'm not sure if I'll ever get another person on. As fun as that might be, I do kind of want this to stay a very personal thing and a very like solo project. Let me know if you enjoyed it, I guess. If you can, obviously, not all of you will be, but... not all of you will be able to, but if you are in a position where you can contact me and let me know what you think, please do. I would appreciate that greatly. So, that's it. Thank you.